My guest today is Dr. Kirsten McEwan, and she's a research psychologist who's been developing and evaluating health and well-being treatments. She is an associate professor at the University of Derby, and she's also project managed evaluations of treatments in NHS, clinical trials, and university settings, producing over 60 published projects. She's a forest bathing practitioner and researcher. Working closely with the Forest Bathing Institute, she conducted the first UK research into a social prescription called forest bathing. And in our conversation today, we'll be focusing on forest bathing. So welcome to the show, Kirsten.
Thanks for inviting me.
Yeah, it's great to have you here because I saw the research presentation that you did at the University of Derby, and I was just immediately interested. I thought your findings sounded quite fascinating. And obviously that presentation was, relatively a short presentation. So I'm hoping to just get a little bit deeper in this conversation. So yeah, I'm really looking forward to hear what you have to say.
Oh, thanks.
So what exactly is forest bathing and how did you get into it?
Well, it's the direct translation from Japanese into English of something called Shinrin-yoku. So forest bathing comes from Japan, and it originated around, 1982 as a social prescription across Japan as a way to tackle having a stressed workforce. So their government recognised that they had a lot of stress in their workforce, but also a lot of what they call techno stress, so too much time spent working in front of screens. And I suppose with their kind of cultural background of appreciation of nature through things like Buddhism and Shintoism, a lot of Japanese people were already connected to nature and valuing it. So it was about really creating the space and the opportunity for people to do that more. So their government invested in different forest bathing sites across the country. So they protected woodland. They also did a lot of replanting, and they've now got over 60 clinics where you can go and try forest bathing. So if you go to your doctor in Japan and you've got high blood pressure or stress, they'll say, well, you can take a tablet or you can try forest bathing. And the translation, I suppose it sounds a bit weird, the term forest bathing, and we do get a lot of people coming along thinking, oh, it's wild swimming or something, or skinny dipping in the woods. But the easiest way to think about it is a Japanese colleague of mine said, well, if you think about the word sunbathing, you're kind of basking in the sun and enjoying it. So really, forest bathing is just a way of kind of basking in the woodland atmosphere and really noticing and appreciating your surroundings, but also you're absorbing all of the beneficial chemicals that you get in woodland. So the trees don't just put out the oxygen that we breathe in, they also put out these volatile organic compounds or wood essential oils. And when we breathe these in, there's research to show that we get this really big immune boosting effect. So some of the research in Japan showed that by breathing in these wood essential oils, we get up to about a 50% increase in our anti-cancer protein activity and numbers in our bodies. And that effect, that just of 2 hours spent exposed to these chemicals, can give you an immune boost that lasts up to a month later. So yeah, that's where the term forest bathing comes from. But I mean, people use other terms like mindfulness in nature as well, because that's really what it is. It's about being mindfully aware whilst you're being in nature and being really kind of connected to your surroundings.
Yeah. And when you compared it with sunbathing, but forest bathing is, you can still get benefits. Like you can be, say, in the winter, totally wrapped up in everything, and you don't have to have your skin exposed.
No, it's really just more about being aware of your surroundings. So if you went forest bathing with a guide, they'd be trying to help you to get to notice your surroundings using all of your senses. So they typically take you through the 5 common senses that we have. So you might start your walk by noticing visual aspects of the woodland. So your guide might prompt you to notice different colours or different shapes of leaves or different patterns in tree bark. And then Usually move on to smelling, so noticing what you can smell on the air, but also picking up leaf litter and maybe smelling that, or tearing some leaves to release the scent a bit more, or breaking twigs. Yeah, and just appreciating what it is you can smell, and then noticing what you can hear. So really actively listening into nature, to see what different sounds you can hear, whether that's birdsong or running water or the breeze through the trees. And then touch as well. So although looking at things visually is great, there's no substitute for our fingertip sense of touch when it comes to noticing textures like the bark on trees. So it's leading you to notice how things feel as well. And often guides end their forest bathing session by sharing some kind of foraged tea or snack as well, to engage in the sense of taste. So it's really like a full immersion in your surroundings. So rather than your average walk through the woods where you could be distracted, you could be just thinking about the destination or the goal that you had in mind, or you might be ruminating about how much work you've got to do, or that argument you had with your partner last week. We could be thinking anything and not necessarily really noticing our surroundings. So really what forest bathing and forest bathing guides are trying to do is to really help people notice and appreciate their surroundings with kind of fresh eyes, I suppose.
Yeah, yeah. And can you do the same in a park or in your own garden?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, for sure. There's been quite a few research studies as well that have happened in urban parks, particularly in the Japanese research. It often takes place around a university campus with students as the participants. So there's been a lot of forest bathing studies in parks, but there are parks and there are parks. There's different types of quality of green space, and in general, the sort of nature connectedness research literature shows that the more biodiverse and variable a habitat is, the more benefit we get out of it personally in terms of our well-being. It's just a more stimulating environment. So the more kind of variety there is in the environment, the much easier it is to do forest bathing. But I have seen people do it in their own gardens, particularly for people who've got low energy or mobility impairments. If you can only get out into your own garden, or you appreciate the view out of a window, then that's still extremely potentially quite a powerful experience. And one of the big researchers in Japan, Professor Miyazaki, says you should adapt it to really suit you, because that's where you'll get the most well-being benefits. So for some people, that could be engaging with the house plants around your home or on your balcony. And then for others, it might be their garden or the park, or for other people, it will be going much more into wilderness and visiting a national park or a large woodland. But I guess it's what your preferences are and what's within your capacities to do.
Yeah, and when it comes to, you mentioned the NCOVs, is that going to be the same with, say, a forest compared to your own garden or house plants?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So I just collaborated on some research with Dr. Walker at the University of Sheffield, and we compared the presence of wood essential oils in ancient woodland with a public garden in the city centre. And there were so many more wood essential oils in the ancient woodland. There were hardly any in the urban garden. So if it's the sort of benefit of breathing in those woodland chemicals that you're after, then there's no substitute for ancient woodland, and woodland that's natural and mixed, because there's quite a bit of research coming out of Japan and Korea now to show that if you've got mixed evergreen and deciduous woodland, you get the maximum sort of amount or variety of those wood essential oils, and often they're a lot more prevalent in evergreen species as well. So it's really desirable to have that mix and that biodiversity in terms of the chemical benefits, as well as our kind of psychological well-being benefits as well.
Yeah, and what are the effects? What are the actual benefits that you get from these oils?
From breathing in the chemicals?
Yeah.
Yeah, so it's part of the tree's defensive strategy. So when when, for example, they're being nibbled at by a caterpillar, they'll put out a toxin into their leaves to make it taste bitter, so that whatever's nibbling them just goes, oh, that tastes bitter, and it moves on. But because trees operate as a community, and they're sort of sharing resources and communication, they'll also put out these chemical signals in the air, which are the wood essential oils, which warn their neighbouring trees, watch out, this caterpillar's in the area, make your leaves taste bitter, and then whatever is nibbling them has to completely leave the area. So it's actually part of the tree's defensive strategy, and it has this kind of mirroring impact on our own defensive or immune system strategies, in that when we breathe those chemicals in, we get this immune boost. So they took some Japanese businessmen, put them in a windowless hotel room for 3 days and pumped in just the chemicals from the woodland. And they took blood samples and found that after they'd been exposed to these chemicals, the businessmen had about 50% more anti-cancer proteins. Some of these are called natural killer cells, and a lot lower inflammatory markers like cortisol and adrenaline. So it's all giving you that immune boosting effect in terms of lowering inflammation, but also increasing those anti-cancer proteins.
Yeah, that's quite amazing results, actually.
Yeah, really impressive.
Yeah. Even with them, they were like in a windowless hotel, like you said. So they weren't getting any sort of direct nature, but even just those oils.
Yeah. It's a good reason to buy a diffuser and have one at home. I've got one which I put on every night for half an hour before I go to bed, that's got either pine or cedar oil in it.
Oh, yeah, that's a good one. I might try that one, because the essential oils I sort of personally have at home are things like lavender, and I've got like a mixed blends, but I haven't really thought about getting things like pine, cedar, like the tree oils.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's been research to show that different oils like lavender and rosemary, for example, they're also very beneficial in similar ways. But it seems to be in particular the essential oils from cedar that have a very strong effect on our immune system. There's a lot more research to be done in this area, comparing different species of trees and different types of woodland and environment. But that's what's come about so far, is that mixed evergreen and deciduous woodland's better, and the evergreens have the most wood essential oils like cedar.
Okay, yeah, try. Might look out for that, and I might do a bit of research myself, see what's said about them, and get some oils myself. Now, I know you conducted a study with adults looking at self-reported well-being and heart rate variability. So, can you tell us what you found?
Yeah, I mean, the amount of research in Japan and South Korea has been huge in terms of forest bathing, but we haven't done much in the Western world. So we're only really starting to touch upon this in Europe. And in the first study in the UK, I worked with the Forest Bathing Institute, who are an organisation in Surrey, and we took people on a 2-hour forest bathing walk in semi-ancient woodland in Derbyshire. And we asked people to fill out well-being surveys before and after, and we measured their heart rate variability throughout the entire walk, so we could see, what particular elements of the walk were beneficial to heart rate. Is it the visual activities, or smell, or touch? What is it that has that magic ingredient that really helps to improve heart health and well-being? And we got people to fill out questionnaires, and we saw that anxiety significantly decreased, as did anger and depression. So that's kind of in common with what we found in Japanese studies as well. But also people's sense of feeling connected to each other, so their social connection improved. And I think part of that is because you're all together in a group, you're doing exactly the same activities. And whilst the walk is mostly in silence, we do invite people to share the nice things that they've noticed on the walk. So it's a very positive sharing experience, where people inspire each other about, oh, I noticed this really amazing moss, and then somebody else would know to kind of go and look out for that moss next time. And we did get a lot of people, making comments like, I know we've come here as strangers, but I feel like you're all friends and I want to keep in touch. And we had people lift sharing out of the woodland together. So that was really nice. So yeah, there's a big social benefit. And then we looked at rumination as well, because the Forest Bathing Institute said that they suspected that it really helped people just switch off their brains and stop ruminating. And that's indeed what we found, is rumination really significantly decreased. So, you know, that sort of overplaying of problems that we go through in our minds, where you just keep thinking again and again about the same issues, that completely dropped away during the walk. And then we got people to wear heart rate variability chest straps. So heart rate variability is a bit different to heart rate. So a healthy heart beat doesn't sort of tick with the regularity of a second hand on a clock. There's some variability in those beats, and that reflects how well balanced our fight and flight system is with our rest and digest system. So in other words, how well balanced our sympathetic nervous system, or fight and flight, where we're feeling a bit sped up or threatened, how well that's balanced with our parasympathetic or rest and digest system, when we're just feeling relaxed and connected to other people and there's no threats present, we're just feeling generally contented. And what forest bathing's been shown to do is to really increase that heart rate variability. So to increase the amount of time we're able to spend in our rest and digest, or kind of soothing, relaxed contentment system. And that's generally what we found in the study, is that people's heart rate variability went up during the walk, but it went up in particular when people spent some quiet, contemplative time with a tree, when people lay down underneath the tree, looking up into the canopy and being guided through a mindfulness activity by the forest bathing guide. And also listening to the sound of running water really increased people's heart rate variability. So yeah, sound was pretty important. And again, there's lots of research to show that the sounds of nature are particularly potent in improving health and well-being as well.
Yeah. And what were the people that took part, and the participants that you got, what was their attitude about this at the start? Did you have people that were really willing, or were there people that were a bit skeptical, anything like that?
These were really willing participants. Yeah, they were recruited through a newsletter. So I work for a charity called the Compassionate Mind Foundation, and that's it's a form of talking therapy that involves lots of, I guess, mindfulness type activities and compassionate imagery. So imagining somebody else being really kind and nurturing towards you. So the people on that newsletter, they're already into mindfulness. They're already very kind of committed to self-care, and had a lot of insight into what it takes to look after your own well-being. So they were really up for it and really excited about coming along on the walk. I mean, I think we had one person who was skeptical. There was a guy who sort of said, I wouldn't have normally come to this. I'm just here because my partner brought me along and didn't really know what I was getting into. But at the end, he was an absolute convert, like our biggest convert. He was in his 70s, and he said, this is the best thing I've ever done in my life.
Wow.
And he really, really got into looking at the detail of the moss, and said it just really took him back to childhood and camping trips and just that excitement of being in nature. So yeah, we had a lot of really good feedback from people as well about how much they enjoyed it and were able to relax as a result.
Yeah, and so the results overall with heart rate variability and with well-being, they quite significantly improved.
Yeah. I mean, I can't remember the exact figures, but I think it was something like a 30% reduction in anxiety and 12% increase in heart rate variability. But heart rate variability improved by more than 5 milliseconds. And in previous research, that's what we'd call clinically significant change. So it's enough of a change that if you took that to your GP or health professional, they'd go, oh, that's enough that you've improved in terms of your daily quality of life. It's a noticeable improvement rather than a tiny one.
And is this something that how often would someone have to do to sort of maintain those improvements?
Good question. Yeah, there are some mixed views on this. So in Japan, people like Professor Lee and Professor Miyazaki, they tend to say that because of the wood essential oil effect, the breathing in the chemicals for 2 hours means you get a 1 month boost in your immune system. They were sort of recommending at least one long monthly visit to a woodland, so 2 to 3 hour visit over 1 month. In the UK, there's been some routine data collected by Natural England, and they found that 2 hours a week was the optimum amount of time to spend in nature to get well-being benefits. But you don't have to do that in one sitting. They were saying even if you went for 20 minutes one day, an hour the next, and then another 20 minutes, it all sort of accumulates and you get that beneficial effect. And I suppose, I mean, looking at like the forest bathing literature, if you look at things like heart rate variability and if you measure somebody's salivary cortisol, for example, which is a stress hormone, those things typically take 20 minutes to improve. So if you can go for a minimum of 20 minutes a couple of times a week, you're going to get some really good benefits from that.
It sounds quite good. It sounds like a manageable thing to do rather than having to go for like 2 hours at one stretch.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I know you've also done research with younger people, haven't you, with adolescents? And what was that like?
Yeah, I mean, that's something there's been a few forest bathing studies of adolescents, but not many, because generally the feedback is it's pretty tough to do forest bathing with young people. They're way too active and kind of chaotic, and they don't want to do silent walking. I mean, I remember talking to Professor Lee in Japan, and he said he tried to put the heart rate monitors on the kids and they just ran away and tore them off and threw them in the bushes. And it was, it was just crazy. They couldn't do forest bathing with them. But, I'm lucky that I trained when I did my training as a forest bathing practitioner. There was another girl training with me, and she does kind of forest school type activities with kids in urban parks in London. And I think her company is called Sayers Croft that she works with. But yeah, they take school kids out every day, and she's got way more expertise with children than I do. So I really called upon her and said, can we do this together? Because I don't have children, and I'm not actually, I wouldn't consider myself to be very good with children either. But yeah, so with a mix of sort of her guidance, she brought into it a lot of the forest school activities, and then we tried to give them a bit of a sensory focus. So, for example, we got the children collecting different coloured leaves and said, a bit like you've got a Dulux colour palette when you go to the shops to decide what colour to paint your bedroom wall. You could go and pick colours out of nature that you might want to paint your bedroom wall. So that kind of got them noticing different colours on the sly. And then we got them to take inspiration from the artwork of Andy Goldsworthy. So he's somebody who creates temporary nature art by picking up different coloured leaves and making almost mosaic-like patterns on the woodland floor with them. So we showed them a few pictures of his artwork to get them started, and then they went off and created their own natural artwork. So again, that's sort of keeping them into the sort of visual sense of what nature has to offer. And then we got them to listen quietly for 1 minute and then tell us what they'd heard in nature. And then we just did more playful activities, really. So there's also a great organisation called Project Wild Thing. You can look them up online, and they have so many ideas for different activities to do with children outdoors. But we took a few of their ideas. So we got kids to partner up, and one would stand in front of the tree and ask the tree questions about its life. So interviewing the tree, and the other child would stand behind the tree and answer on behalf of the tree. And that led to a lot of creativity from the young people, and they really loved doing that. I think one of them was saying, one of the questions that kept coming up was, do you mind when dogs come and wee up against you? So yeah, we got some quite funny questions in the interviews. And then there's also, I suppose this is a technique that's used a lot in mindful walking with young people, but we also got them to partner up, and one would spin the other round with their eyes shut and then lead their partner with their eyes closed to a tree. They get to know their tree through touch alone. Then they get brought back to the center, spun around again, and they have to find their tree. And that's another sneaky way of getting them to engage with the sense of touch. So really, you're using kind of games and creativity to trick them into noticing their surroundings through their senses.
And what results did you find from working with these children?
So not as like impressive as the results with the adults, it has to be said. I mean, I would say that the kids were already really well socially connected. It's part of the reason we couldn't get them to walk silently, was because they were just wanting to chat to their friends. So things like social connection only went up a little bit. I think that went up by about 12%. Heart rate variability I had to give up on, because similar to Professor Lee's experience, they were pulling them off and just running around too much, so the data was unreliable. But yeah, their nature connection was, I think, the thing that improved the most. I think that was about a 30% increase in nature connection. They also showed reductions in anxiety and rumination as well, but just not as much as the adults. And I think it's because, lucky them, they're probably, young and not quite into those issues yet, I guess.
Yeah. Which is a good thing. Hopefully that was the reason.
Yeah.
And talking about, I know I mentioned to you before about parks and things and, houseplants. So how does forest bathing compare with walking in a park? How would you say like one might be better than the other, even if marginally, or could they actually be the same?
Yeah, I think both are extremely beneficial, but what the evidence seems to lean towards is that the more conscious and connected and appreciative you are of those surroundings, the more benefit you're going to get out of it. Like the more you notice, the more you'll benefit. So a typical walk through a park, this is the tricky bit. It might look like rushing through to get from A to B. You might be on your phone, you could be listening to a podcast, you could be ruminating about any kind of things, good or bad. So we're generally quite distracted, I'd say, when we're just left to our own devices. So I think the real kind of benefit of going with a forest bathing guide and having somebody guide you through it is that you can completely switch off. You can be totally mindful about your surroundings, and that guide is just helping you to constantly keep aware of and connected to those surroundings. And yeah, the benefits are just going to be greater from just that simple awareness. I mean, the way one of my participants put it is that normally when she walks through the park on her own, nature's just the like backdrop, it's the scenery to the theatre set, and she doesn't really pay it much attention. But when she comes forest bathing, she really feels like she is part of nature. Everything's alive, so is she. She's part of it, she's connected to it. She said it's the difference between, walking through the theatre set and actually being part of a living environment. And she just noted as well about how easy it is for us to forget that nature is alive, that just to look at the trees as inanimate objects or as, part of the scenery, but really, everything is alive and we can connect with that. So I think there's just no substitute for going out with a guide, having that experience. And maybe the more you practice going out with a guide, maybe the more you're able to switch into forest bathing mode when you go out on your own. But yeah, I mean, I'm a trained practitioner, and if I go out on my own, I know I get distracted. I think, what was I meant to be doing? Oh, I was meant to be noticing the colours of the leaves. Oh, I've got to do this thing for dinner tonight. Oh, I've got to get that shopping. And you're just off on distraction and rumination. So I think completely giving yourself over to a guide and just letting them run the show for you for a bit is, incredibly helpful. And I can say that as somebody who's tried the traditional sit down indoors mindfulness and been rubbish at it. This is something I can definitely do if somebody's guiding me through it.
Yeah, I think that sounds like that is the key. And I know that you've also done some research with online forest bathing. So could you tell us what online forest bathing is first?
Yeah. So, I mean, it would be easy to be skeptical about this, I think, and to think, well, that
Mm.
sounds rubbish.
Yeah.
It's not going to be a substitute for the real thing, but I think it really can be for people who cannot access nature. So this research was done in collaboration with forest bathing practitioners who have long COVID.
Mm.
So they've got low energy, mobility impairment. Some of them have been bedridden at times, not able to get out into nature. And they've developed these online practices for people who aren't able to get out into nature because they've got long COVID or low energy or mobility impairment. And I've also been working with a company in Canada called EcoWisdom. And that's again run by a group of practitioners who've got long term health conditions themselves, which means that they've got low energy or mobility impairment. So it's all about offering forest bathing online, and it's giving people the choice of how they want to do that. So you join a Zoom call where there might be, between 10 and 30 people on that Zoom call. The guide kind of introduces the session, and then they say, right, you've got the choice. You can go and sit in your own garden and do these activities. You could go to your local park. If you've got the energy and mobility, you could be out in woodland or a national park. If you don't have the energy or mobility to even get out into your own garden, however, you can engage with a house plant. You could look at a view out of your window, or the guide offers videos and photos of nature that they
Mm.
can guide the participants through. And that's the important thing, because I think if you were just looking at video or photo footage, or just looking at the view out the window, or looking at your house plant,
Mm.
that would probably get boring quite quickly. So it's having the guide leading you through it mindfully that really makes the big difference. And I've seen this done beautifully by EcoWisdom, because their guides, lucky them, they're living in Canada. So they've got this beautiful scenery around them, and they've made some amazing nature videos and photographs that are really, really striking and very well thought through as well, in terms of the guide videos themselves. So they'll video their hand touching the moss or their feet entering the water. And because we've got mirror neurons in our brain, when we see somebody else's hand on the moss or somebody else's feet in the water, we can have that reflected sense of feeling it ourselves. Um, so I think, yeah, just very, very careful, thoughtful, curated guiding. You can really bring it to life for people, even if it is an online experience, and get some fantastic results.
So even if you're not getting the touch or the smell, it still can be good.
I think so. I mean, the guides will prompt people to, not just notice the visual aspects of what's on the screen or out the window. They'll be encouraging them to listen to different sounds, and they usually provide soundtracks to go with the videos and photos, like running water or bird song.
Mm.
They'll encourage people to use their sense of touch with their house plant, or
Mm.
if you're not able to get out, if you've got a carer who can bring you some pine cones or some leaves or some stones, or some natural object from the outside world in, then you
Mm.
can engage in the sense of touch or smell, just with those objects. So yeah, there's different ways of, I suppose, engaging the senses, even if it's done remotely.
Yeah, well, I suppose you could put some cedar oil on a diffuser while you're doing the
Yeah, yeah,
online forest bathing. And
yeah.
what, yeah, and what results did you find with the COVID patients, with the long COVID?
Yeah, so I mean, I was actually quite blown away by this. I mean, to be fair to the guides, they just did a brilliant job again of just really being thoughtful and curating the instruction. So it was a very immersive experience. And we're talking about people who are bedridden, they've not been able to leave their homes. They're really scared of going out into society because of fear of reinfection.
Mm.
And so the most striking result I think we all found was an 81% increase in social connection, which we
Wow.
just that's just amazing.
Mm.
And I wasn't really expecting people's symptom severity to improve, but it did. It improved by about 27%. So people
Wow.
had more energy, they felt less pain, they felt less kind of brain fog or confusion, problems with memory, and they also felt less anxious and depressed. So yeah, some really lovely results there. It really shut down people's rumination again as well. And we asked for written feedback, and a big comment people had was that it just helped them shut off from everything else that's going on in their lives and give them a break from that pain that they've been experiencing as well.
Wow, that's quite remarkable. And how often did they do this in the study?
I think we did, 4 sessions of forest bathing. So one session a week for an hour on Zoom with the long COVID study. With the study in Canada, it was a lot more intensive. So I think they can attend as many sessions as they want, but each session's about 2.5, 3 hours. I mean, we got fantastic results from that study as well, very similar in terms of the improvement in symptom severity. And just some amazing comments from people about, the sense of like holding complex emotions at the same time. So a lot of the activities really stirred memories up for them of earlier times in life when they might have had full mobility. So it brought with it this sense of loss and sadness and grief at what they couldn't do anymore. Oh, I know I'll never get back out into the woodland and I'll never be able to touch the moss. But at the same time, a very positive experience of, I never knew I could still have this connection with nature and this experience, and to experience it through the guide and to feel like I am in nature. So through the guide's mindfulness and imagery techniques, they were really able to feel like they were in the woodland, even though they weren't there. And that really blew people away and was a very positive and empowering experience for them.
Yeah. And as for long COVID symptoms, did they sort of, you said, there was a decrease in the symptoms, and did that last?
So did that last? We did try and measure people again at 1 month later. And unfortunately, I mean, as with the nature of this population, people are really struggling with their health. They're attending lots of hospital appointments. We didn't get enough participants responding to know whether that would be the case or not. But with the group in Canada, they were particularly dedicated to the research, and a month later we did get full data from their group, and very pleased to say that the results were pretty much largely maintained, especially that symptom severity improvement. That improvement was maintained 1 month later. But I think it's just credit to them that they got so into the activities. They were practicing them a lot on a daily basis, so they kept up their regular practice even though the sessions had stopped, and I think it helped them to maintain the benefits that they'd gained.
Wow, that is really good, really good. And if people want to do either like one online forest bathing sessions or in real life forest bathing sessions, could you give us some websites or contacts that they could go to?
Yeah, so the obvious ones would be the people I've worked with. So Eco Wisdom in Canada, although there'd be a time difference for people in the UK. One of my long COVID partners, she started a company called Kindred Soil, which is specifically for people with long COVID, low mobility, low energy, to take part online. And then it's a case of just, I suppose, Googling and looking at Eventbrite as well, because a lot of forest bathing guides, it's quite difficult to make a living out of forest bathing guiding. So it's something people do on the side of other full-time work. They often don't have a website. So I found personally a good way to find a guide is to look at websites like Eventbrite or Meetup in your local area and just use search terms like forest bathing or mindful walking. And you should be able to find somebody near you that way.
Okay. And I was going to ask a little bit about social prescribing. Has this been implemented in social prescribing yet?
A little bit. I mean, I suppose in the UK and Europe, we're still very early days when it comes to implementing social prescribing. It's not quite working as smoothly as people would hope it would. There's still mostly people are self-referring into things rather than GPs or link workers doing that.
Yeah.
But the forest bathing research I did with the Forest Bathing Institute in Surrey did lead to them getting some funding from Surrey Council and also from the government as one of their test and learn sites for social prescribing. So they've now taken adults with mental health issues and learning disabilities out on free forest bathing sessions. So they put on a minibus to get people out to the woodland, and the session is free, so anyone can take part. And that's been going really well. I've just finished looking at the data for that, and they've had some fantastic results, like 40% reduction in anxiety again. It's slowly becoming part of social prescribing here. There's another study I did in London in partnership with a mindfulness expert called Vanessa Potter. And that's taking people out into urban parks in London. It's called Park Bathe, if anyone wants to try that in London. But that's slowly becoming available on social prescription just by sort of telling the link workers about it. They've started to refer more people into that. But yeah, I think it's early days for the UK with social prescribing. It's worked extremely well in Japan. It's really taking off in South Korea. Canada's now got a lot of, access to national parks on social prescription, and Eco-Wisdom are partly funded out of social prescribing schemes as well. So it's moving in the right direction. But I think it's for now, if you're keen to give it a go, it would be a case of just Googling it online and seeing what's out there.
Yeah, and you mentioned Park Bathe, because I was thinking about Park Run as something that really took off.
Yeah.
So Park Bathe takes off in the same way.
Yeah, I mean, that's kind of what inspired Vanessa in terms of calling it Park Bathe is the idea that not everybody is I suppose there are some people who would be skeptical, like you said earlier, about something like forest bathing. It's still fairly new to us in the West, and a bit in the same way with Park Run, how not everybody can run a marathon or is an athlete. It's for people who would never normally do this kind of activity. It's an opportunity for them to try it, get a taster. And if they like it, then they can go and try the full forest bathing experience and start doing that.
Yeah, yeah. Well, thank you, Kirsten. It was really interesting chatting with you today. And if people want to contact you, where can they do so?
The best place to look for me is probably, I work at the University of Derby. So my contact details are on my staff webpage if anyone wants to get in touch.
Okay. Thank you very much again for coming to the show.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening to this episode of Wellbeing in the Kingdom. If you've enjoyed, learned from, or been inspired or empowered by today's episode, then please help to support the show by leaving a 5-star review wherever you get your podcasts.